Early on, there were very, very many truck gardeners in Omaha. And the one that I remember more than the rest is because my folks were acquainted with him when I was a youngster. And later on, when I started into business and I was in a position where I was buying merchandise off of the market for the store that I worked for, I would buy a lot of merchandise from this gentleman. Happened to be a Jewish man by the name of Herman Millman, and his farm was located in North Omaha, somewhere around the airport area. And he was a wonderful man and a hard worker, and he and his wife and early on his kids helped him on the farm. But I remember specifically it was during the Depression years, and he and the other truck gardeners used to sell their produce at about the same price. And I remember specifically one of the items I used to buy from him was radishes. He had asparagus and other locally grown produce that was very good. But the radishes were packed 100 bunches in a bushel basket, large bunches the way you see in the grocery stores today. And I used to buy them from him on a wholesale basis at $1 a bushel for 100 bunches of radishes. He'd deliver them, we'd visit, and it was a great time. There were many truck gardeners in Omaha. I don't remember them all. There are 3 or 4 of them whose names I recall. One was a couple of them actually whose names I recall right now. Herman Millman, a trucker named Herman Stratbucker, and several others. And they would show up at the market and park there was an alleyway between 10th and 11th Street, between Howard and Jackson, behind the buildings there, and to the south of this area, and it was a covered area where the truckers would back in. They'd show up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and they'd be there till maybe 8 or 9 o'clock, and most of their produce was sold to the retailers or the little peddlers who operated stands around the rest of the open market area, and to grocers who'd come to the market. At the time, there were, and I could be off a couple of hundred, I think around 1,800 retail grocers in Omaha, 1, 2, 3 in every block. And they would sell their produce to the peddlers who had their stands on the market, and grocers who would come and buy their produce. You know, in talking here, there are a lot of stories that come to mind, and one of many, in particular, some of the people on the market, many of the people on the market, when they came from the old country originally, they needed work, and having difficulty finding work, many of them started peddling, and they'd buy wares, and they'd go around the neighborhoods, house to house, selling watermelons or strawberries or whatever was in season. And you know, there's a fine distinction, or maybe not such a fine distinction, between education and intelligence. You can be the most highly educated person in the world and be quite a stoop, or you can have had no formal education and be highly intelligent. And you know, now, you know, kids go to school and they learn sales psychology and marketing techniques, and I have to tell you, much of this somehow or other was built into these people. And I like the story that Louis Saporin tells, that when he first came over, he was in partners with with A.B. Feldman, and they were out peddling. And as time went on, their finances reached a stage where they were able to buy a little truck and go from house to house, and they did very well. And they finally had a truck, an open bed truck. There was no refrigeration and no heating, and they would go to load up their truck with various kinds of produce and go out to the small towns and peddle their wares. And one winter day, they loaded their truck with apples, and they started out to the small towns to sell their wares, and they finally got to the town they were heading for, and they parked their truck on a corner and started to sell their apples. And by the time they got there, the temperature dropped to about 26 degrees. And so Louis starts beating his hands against his chest to keep warm. And Abe looks at him. He says, "For God's sakes, Louis, don't look cold." He says, "The people will think the apples are frozen." There's all the sales psychology that you'd want. Well, you know, when I was in business, I used to tell my salespeople and my kids, my sons that were in business, this story. And Louis retired and went out on the West Coast to live with his family and with some of his family that were out there at the time. And he'd come back to Omaha occasionally. He always came in to visit. And one day he came into my office, and the kids happened to be there. And I said, "I want you to meet my sons." So we came back to their office, and I said, "Boys, I want you to meet Louis Siporn. He's the man of whom I tell this story about beating his hands against the chest with his apples." And Louis started laughing. He said, "My God," he says, "you still remember that?" I said, "I sure do, Louis." He said, "I hope you told him the payoff." I said, "What payoff?" He said, "The doggone Abe wouldn't even let me wear gloves, and those damned apples felt like snowballs." Later on, Abe went into business for himself, and Louis went into partnership with Big Sam Wolfson, and later on they took in as a partner Charlie Cohn. And the name of their company was Independent Fruit Company, and they did very well. There were many grocers, like I mentioned earlier, around 1,800 grocers who came to the market. And 5 o'clock in the morning in the summertime, you couldn't get a parking space within 3 blocks of the old market. All the grocers had come, and at any rate, they did very well and sold their merchandise to a lot of good stores in Omaha. And Red was a sharp guy, but with a temper and loud, but a good heart. And many of the peddlers from the old market had come and shop at buy their wares from the wholesalers. And one day, and our business happened to be located across the street from Independent Fruit Company. And it was about 10 o'clock in one summer morning, and old man Rottola, they used to call him Shoes, and I don't know why, but a nice guy that had a stand on the market. He was shopping for tomatoes, and Sam and Louie had just unloaded some tomatoes, and he came up on the walk, and Sam was waiting on him. And apparently he asked Sam the price of tomatoes, and he didn't like the price, so he told Sam he was too high. And Sam started raving, and he had a voice you could hear for miles away. And he said, "Too high." He says, "You SOB," he says, "my tomatoes, I'm treating you right." And he gave him a story about how he was right. He says, "You SOB," he says, "you get out of here and don't ever come back." And Louis, the refined guy of the business, came running out, and he says, "For God's sake, Sam," he says, "don't talk like that out here." Sam says, "What are you talking about?" He said, "This guy is a real SOB." And Louis said, "For God's sakes," he says, "you got to call him an SOB. At least take him in the back room." And Sam said, "Back room? He's an SOB out here. He's an SOB in the back room." Well, old man Rotella went on his way. And about a half hour later, I look across the street, and old man Rotella, who had shopped the market and couldn't do any better, was buying tomatoes from Red Wolf's, and they were getting along just fine. Paul Green had a fruit house next door to where we were located, and Paul used to had a large open bed over-the-road truck. In those days, I don't believe there were any refrigerated trucks or heated trucks, and he would haul merchandise in from Texas or Colorado or Arkansas, wherever the produce happened to be coming from, the things he wanted to sell. And one day, he hauled in a load of Mexican pineapple. Pineapple was beautiful, and in those days, maybe still, I don't know, Mexican pineapple was very good, but once in a while it would cut black. And there was a man by the name of Bill O'Neill who worked for the city, who was the market inspector. And quite honestly, all the years I was down there, Bill was a wonderful guy, but I don't ever remember him really inspecting anything. He'd walk around the market and look at the merchandise. And he lived somewhere near the market. And on this particular day, around lunchtime, he happened to be walking by Paul's place of business, and Paul said, "Bill, where are you going?" He said, "I'm going home to lunch." He said, "You want to take a couple of pineapple?" Bill said, "Sure." And he took a couple of pineapple. Sure enough, the pineapple cut black, and about an hour later, after Bill had discovered it when he took home, he came down and he condemned a load of pineapple. So the next morning, Paul's got a load of pineapple, same load, parked in front of his place of business, selling to the grocers. And Bill comes by and he said, "I thought I told you not to sell the pineapple." Paul says, "This is a different load, Bill." Bill says, "Okay," and he goes on his way, and Paul sold the pineapple in town. Across the street from where we were located, there was Patello Banana Company, and Gennaro Patello and his son John and his son-in-law Matt Tantillo used to operate that banana company. As far as I can remember, the only other people in town that sold bananas in those days was Caruso Banana Company, and they were located on the alley right on the corner, halfway between Howard and Jackson Street, right next door, or a couple doors away from where Greenberg Fruit Company was. And early on, before this time, Galinsky Fruit Company at one time sold bananas. And also there had been a company called Trimble Brothers that sold bananas. But at any rate, at this time, as I remember, they were the only ones. And this was during the war years when a lot of merchandise was scarce. And bananas, of course, was one of the scarcest. And the grocers had come to town, to the market, and they all wanted bananas. And bananas were in very limited supply. In those days, they came in bunches. They were not cut off in as the way we see them today. And as far as I know, I don't remember any delivery trucks that Patello had. If you wanted bananas, you bought a bunch of bananas that weighed from, I don't know, 40 to 100 pounds. You threw them in your car or truck and you went away with them. And this Gennaro Patello was I don't know that he was a mean person, but he was a mean appearing person. And if he didn't like you, he'd actually chase you out of his banana house with that sharp curved banana knife that they used to cut the bananas off of the bunches with when they had to. Right next door to Patello, there was a fellow in business by the name of John DeStefano, and they used to call him Celery John. And John had a voice like Caruso. It was absolutely marvelous to hear him. And what he did was cut up celery and other vegetables, and he made these soup bunches, what they called soup bunches. And all the grocers, many of the grocers, most of them as a matter of fact, would buy them and sell them in their stores. And what they were little bunches of with a couple of pieces of celery and a carrot and maybe a turnip or a parsnip and some other soup vegetable cut up, and the grocers would buy them and sell them for a nickel or a dime, and the shopper, when they came in and needed vegetables for soup, they didn't have to buy a whole stalk of celery and a bunch of carrots. They'd buy one of these. I wish they had them today, and make soup, and you could stand outside his door, and his personality and his demeanor was the same as his voice. Just a wonderful human being, and with a voice you could, like, stand in an opera or sitting in an opera house, and it was just wonderful. Before I started working on the wholesale market, I used to do the buying for one of the large stores in Omaha, and I was a large buyer. And one of the wholesale jobbers was a fellow by the name of John Rosso. He's the person that got Sammy Monaco and Joe Vitale in business. They took over his business. Sam Monaco was either a relative or some close relationship somehow, and John Rosso took Sam into business, and that's how Sam and Joe Vitale ended up owning his place of business. But John was a mean-appearing man, and when I was doing the buying, I never walked by his place without buying something. And in later years, John and I got to be good friends, and we were talking about old times one day, and I said to him, "You know, John, when I first started coming down the market, I said, I have to admit, I said that I was really afraid of you, and so I always bought something from you." And he said, "Really?" He said, "You SOB." He said, "If I'd have known that, I'd have sold you the moon." Also, I'm being prodded here by Ben and Bill to try and remember some of these stories. At any rate, before Charlie Cohen became a partner with Louis and Red Wolfson in his business, he worked for Levinson Fruit Company. Levinson Fruit Company is located on the north side of Howard Street between 10th and 11th, right near the entrance to the passageway that goes down to V. Mertz now. And there are offices upstairs, and the building is constructed with maybe more than one, but at least one large steel pole that goes clear from the basement through the ceiling of the roof. And some of the offices are located near that pole. As a matter of fact, it may be going through one or two of the offices. But anyhow, one of the brokers, fruit brokers, had an office up there. I've forgotten his name, and I wouldn't mention it now anyhow, but he was a small man, very devout looking. And as a matter of fact, when you'd see him walking down the street, you always felt that he was carrying a Bible. And he happened to be, it has nothing to do with the story, but he was the broker for Ocean Spray cranberries. I remember that. And this is in the days before they were packaged, and the grocers used to buy them in either a 25-pound wooden box and a big or in large barrels, and they would sell them by the scoopful or the pound to their customers when they came to their stores. Anyhow, this devout-looking little man liked ladies, and every once in a while he'd invite one up to his office. And one day he came into Charlie, who worked for Levinson, and he said, "Charlie," he said, "I need you to do me a favor." He said, "Anytime that I got a gal up there, and you see somebody coming," he said, "get your hammer and pound like hell on that steel pole to warn me that there's someone on the way." I'm being asked to try and remember some of the events, some humorous, some maybe not so funny, of what went on or during the time I was in the market. I remember one story or one incident. The fruit houses, when they ran short of merchandise, used to buy merchandise from one another occasionally. And Lester Meyer and Eddie Meyer and their brother-in-law, Harry Perlick, had a wholesale fruit house. And Harry later on went on to Chicago, where he went into the, I think, electrical supply business with one of his relatives there. But at any rate, Lester was not averse to embellishing his description of what he had for sale. And one day we were short of utility-grade russet potatoes, and I called Lester and asked if he had any that he could spare. I said, "You got about 25 bags of them?" He said, "I sure have." Well, knowing Lester, I asked about the quality of the potatoes. I said, "Are they good?" And he said, "Sam," he said, "these are the best potatoes we've ever had in our place to this day." So I sent a driver to pick up 25 bags. And about 10 minutes later, the driver came back, no potatoes. I said, "Where are the potatoes?" He said, "They're not in town yet." One of the largest fruit houses in Omaha, I've been given to understand, was Galinsky Fruit Company. And my understanding is, I've been led to believe that during World War I, at one time, Galinsky Fruit Company was one of the largest fruit houses in the United States of America in point of volume. And how that came to be is that Sam Galinsky was a very, very good and sharp operator. And if, for example, the apricot growing area in Washington on a certain day might have had 3 carloads of apricots to ship, he'd buy all of them and ship one to Omaha and one to Chicago or one to Kansas City or wherever. And that's where the volume came from. But they were the largest in Omaha. And when they closed up, several of the people that worked for them went on to open their own fruit houses here in Omaha. So it gave rise to, probably 5 or 6 fruit dealers, wholesale fruit dealers here in Omaha. At one time, during their existence, Sam Galinsky pretty much controlled the banana business here in town, I've been led to believe, probably because of good connections. I understand that he was the brother-in-law to Samuel Z. Murray, who either at that time, but certainly later on, became the owner of Chiquita Banana Company. And the fruit houses that the people that went into business after he closed, as nearly as I can remember, are Jack Spalick and Jim Delaney and Charlie Benson and George LaHood. These are 4 of the people that I remember, and they all did well afterwards. I got started in the wholesale business in 1946. I was working as a buyer in a large supermarket. Rosaline and I had gotten married in November of 1945. I was making $40 a week, which was in those days, I guess, a pretty decent salary, because a lot of people were working for 15, 20 bucks a week. And an acquaintance of mine had gone to work on the old market, and we were talking about it. And I came home and I talked to Rosalie, I said, I think I'll see if I can find a job down there. I said, hell, I think I can always get a job in a grocery store. So I heard about Leo Nog having at the time, he had a wholesale route. He was selling to grocers in the some of the small towns in Iowa. And so I went down, I hit up Leo Nog for a job. And Leo says, yeah, I'd be glad to have you come to work with me. He says, however, no guarantee, no expense, no other benefits, straight commission basis. And so I talked it over with Rosaline. I figured, well, I can always get a job in a grocery at least. So I went to work for him, and I have to tell you, I was scared to death. And the first week I was there, I grossed $30. And as time went on, I began to build business in the city, and now build business in the country towns in Nebraska, in Elkhorn, Waterloo, Fremont, Blair, Herman, Takema, and several of the stores in Omaha. And the business grew, and and my income grew, and I was doing quite well. And that was about the time that United AG, group of independent grocers, had earlier than that formed a wholesale grocery cooperative. And now they were talking about going into the wholesale produce with their cooperative. And Leo, at the time, decided to offer them a proposition where he would sell them at a certain percentage over cost. Well, whether it was good or not is beside the point, but many of my accounts would have now become house accounts. And at the time, there was another couple of young men who were getting into business in Omaha, and I prefer not to mention their name. And they offered me the same kind of a proposition with the promise that if things worked out after a couple of years, we would become partners in the business. Well, I went to work there, and at the end of about 3 years' time, I found I was doing about 65% of the volume of the whole business. And very sadly, I also discovered that I was being cheated in the sense that my commission was based on the amount of profit that I made. In other words, if something cost $1 and I sold it for $1.50, my commission was based on the 50-cent profit. And so I talked to several of the brokers that I'd become acquainted with, and some truck dealers, and I found that I could get credit and backing, and I was going to go into business for myself. And, there are no secrets around the market, no secrets anywhere, I guess. And Leo at the time got wind of it or heard about it. In the meantime, the United AG deal had fallen through for Leo. They'd opened their own warehouse. And so Leo called me, asked me to come back with a very good guaranteed salary, and he offered me, if I remember correctly, 15% ownership in the business. And so I went to work with Leo, and and as time went on, I was able to acquire a greater percentage of ownership in the business. In the meantime, the nature of the business had changed. Many of the grocers closed, large chains were opening, country stores were not doing so well. And so Leo and I had a discussion about going into the food service business. Well, before that, we had started to get into frozen food a little bit, but we were selling frozen food to grocers. Restaurants weren't using frozen food. And one of my accounts at the time was the Fontenelle Hotel. And I was in calling him one day. In the meantime, Fontenelle had sold out to the Sheraton. And I was in calling on them one day when an official from the Sheraton was there. And they had on their shelves in their storeroom some cans of instant potatoes for mashing. And it was Simplot brand. And he asked if I could get any potatoes like that. Well, in those days, Simplot, which at that time, and I think currently, is the largest producer of frozen potato products in the world, they were then, but they were just getting started in business. Frozen potatoes were something brand new. And I said, and they were still at the time shipping fresh potatoes and onions, and we were buying from them. So I said, well, I think I can. So I came back to the office and I called my potato broker, and lo and behold, 3 days later, 4 people from Idaho came in to see me about frozen potatoes. And there was one of the restaurant operators in town here. There was a fellow in town that had started selling fresh cut French fries. And they saved a lot of labor for the restaurant, but they didn't cook very good. And a few restaurants were using them, and one of my customers was using them. And I called him, and I said, I've got a chance to buy these frozen potatoes. And he said, get them. And I said, but I got to tell you the price. At the time he was buying 100-pound bags of utility-grade russets for $3 a bag. And I said, we'd have to get 15 cents a pound for these. He said, get them. And I was able to buy 50 cases because Simplot was using Omaha Cold Storage as a terminal warehouse. And they'd ship in a carload here and then transship them around the country to Kansas City or wherever. And we didn't have storage for them. Well, we were renting, Hinky Dinky had their frozen food warehouse. They were down on 12th and Jones. Yeah, 12th and Jones Street. And we rented a place in their freezer. They sectioned off a place and they covered it with chicken wire. And it was probably about a room about 10 by 15, and that's where we kept our whatever little frozen food we had. And so we were able to operate from them. And so we started to get out and sell frozen potatoes. I did. And in those days, the restaurants would advertise heavily for what they called a yard man. Yard man was the guy that swept the floors and peeled the potatoes, and they did things, odd jobs in the restaurants. And I'd go in to sell these frozen potatoes, and I'm buying the other fresh ones, it was tough. Well, the caliber of people that did that work was, their work habits were not too great, and they wouldn't show up for work once in a while. And so I'd get a call and say, Sam, you still got those potatoes you're trying to sell me? And that's how we got. And we were the first ones in Omaha to handle frozen potatoes. And we grew to be the largest, years later on, we grew to be the largest distributors in the state of Nebraska and maybe parts of Iowa with frozen potatoes. We introduced them to McDonald's here in Omaha, sure with the approval of the their offices in Chicago. And then we were supplying, it's too long a story to tell you, we were supplying seal test ice cream and we got into that because I was able to supply them when their direct supplier wasn't. I knew somebody that knew somebody. And seal test ice cream with straight carloads of frozen peaches and strawberries and we were the first ones to have frozen pies and frozen cakes and a lot of firsts. And so we got into the food service and the frozen food business. And then I think it was in the sometime in the 60s, in the meantime, we had rented space in the old Mid-Continent cold storage building. It's still there. It was originally Fairmont Foods' old building, and where we had some freezer space in there. And so we got into food service. We got out of the grocery business that was dying, and so we were servicing many of the restaurants and hospitals and clubs and institutions in Omaha with both fresh and frozen food. Then we were talking to, originally, a person that was in the frozen meat supply business about going into a new building, and that fell through. And as I say, there's no secrets in the market. And one day I get a call from Don Greenberg and said, "Are you still interested in building?" Seems that Don Greenberg had gotten the Greenbergs had gotten a notice from Mercer to move out of their building within 30 days. And I guess they had to get a court order for 30 or 60 days to stay there for whatever length of time they needed to be able to maintain their business. And so we got together and we were able to buy the lot on 97th and I Street, and we built a big warehouse out there. And there was no business connection, but we were partners in the ownership of the building, and they maintained half of it and we maintained half of it. And we were not in competition. Ours was strictly food service and frozen and fresh produce. It was about a 50% mix, and we enjoyed a wonderful, wonderful business in Omaha and a wonderful reputation, thank God. And Don's business was strictly jobbing. He sold to the big chains and some of the grocers, and we were able to buy a lot of things together also, which was beneficial certainly to both of us. He for volume and we for being able to maintain our necessary supplies without any too much excess. In the interim, my son Steve had graduated from college in around 1970, I believe. And he'd gone to work for a large insurance company, and he was with them a short time, and he came in one day and said, "Dad, I just hate the insurance business. What if I went to work in the fruit business?" And I said, "Well, give it a shot if you like." At that time, I was still a minority partner, but he came to work with us. And then about 5 years later, my son Howard had graduated from college and became a CPA, and had gone to work for, I believe, Coopers and Lybrand. He came in one day and said that he just wasn't happy doing accounting work. What if I got into business? Well, he had worked for us during the summer months. He'd driven a truck and worked in the warehouse. I said, "Howard, number one, I can't pay you the kind of money that you're able to make, and number two, you know how hard the work is." He says, "Well, let's give it a shot." So he and Steve were both in the business, and thank God the business flourished. And a few years later, we were able to buy the business from Leo, and so we became sole owners of the business. Never changed the name because it was called the Nog Fruit Company, because it had, I don't know, by that time I think 60 years worth of name recognition, and we weren't vain enough to feel that we wanted to change the name. And then, I don't know, I think probably around 1990 something, the year escapes me, but we were given an offer by another company, and it was a very substantial offer, and you know, if it was up to the old man, I'd still be hanging around, but time comes, you know, and you gotta let go. But the kids had other ideas, and so we sold the business. And Howard had always, ever since he got out of school, he said, "I should have gone to law school." So even during the time when he was vice president of new business, he went back to law school and graduated cum laude while he was working. And he loves what he's doing. He's now a partner in a very good law firm here in Omaha. And that's where we are. Steve is with the Internal Revenue Service in Las Vegas, and he's happy in his job. And I'm here at home with Rosaline. And if you got some place that use a good assistant with not too much to do, I'm interested. Now, Ben has asked me to name, as I recollect, all the Jewish wholesale fruit houses in Omaha, and so I'll try and remember them. As a matter of fact, I was going to make some kind of a story write some kind of a story of the history of the old market myself about 5 years ago, and I made this list of all the fruit houses that I could remember, and I had it tucked away somewhere. And when he called the other day and said that he wanted to make a history of the old market, I dug this thing out. I'm glad I still had it, and so I'll see if I can read them all off here. Well, first, of course, I'd have my own name at first. A Nog Fruit Company, which was Leo Nog and myself, Sam Epstein. There was Feldman Fruit Company, which was Abe Feldman and Phil Saporin. There was Paul Green. There was Joe Lorman. Robinson Fruit Company, that was Jake Robinson and Milt Robinson. Independent Fruit Company, which was Louis Siporin, and Sam Wolfson, and Charlie Cohen, and Benny Lefferts. Greenberg Fruit Company, Elmer Greenberg and Don Greenberg. Continental Fruit Company, which was Sam Cutler and Abe Brookstein. And Galensky Fruit Company, which was even before my time. I don't know all the Galenskys. As far as I know, there were 3 of them. I only remember that were in business. There was Sam Galensky and Phil Galensky. And there was another brother, I believe, whose name I don't have. Wilfson Fruit Company, which was Nathan Wilfson. Meyer Fruit Company, Lester Meyer, Eddie Meyer, and Harry Perlich. Eisenberg and Reitstein, which was Ben Eisenberg and George Eisenberg and Harry Reitstein. And Levinson Fruit Company, which was Nathan Levinson and Eddie Levinson and Harry Levinson. Jack Hyman, who was a distributor and a broker. L&L Brokerage, which was Izzy Levinson and Maury Alpern. And, of course, this truck gardener that I mentioned earlier, Herman Millman. Those are the operators, the Jewish operators. As far as I know, those are all of them. There could have been more at one time or another. Those are the ones that I remember.